Practice of the Straight Path. The doctrine of the straight path was not invented by people. No, it was suggested by God. This doctrine was set out in detail by Krishna and then repeated by Jesus Christ, Babaji, and Sathya Sai Baba. Quran and Buddhist scriptures contain the same description of it and even use the same term. This doctrine may be summarized in short in the following 3 points. 1. There is God, one universal consciousness of the Creator, who lives in the highest eon of multidimensional space. 2. He is love. 3. We have to become one with Him through transforming ourselves into love, into the universal spiritual heart, into the heart of the Absolute. Understanding and accomplishment of this are the only things that make sense to spend the life for. Now, we will describe specific methods of advancing on this path. They can be divided into several groups depending on their difficulty: preliminary, intermediate, and highest. Preliminary methods. Preliminary methods help one develop faith, and faith is essential for emergence of the incentive for making spiritual efforts. But what is faith? This is a rather multi-level concept. Some say about their faith, well, I know there is something out there. Cosmic intellect, UFO. Others will assert with confidence, yes, I believe in God. And they will even make a sign of the cross. But they do not make even slightest spiritual efforts, even to find out what God wants from them, let alone to transform themselves in accordance with His will. On the contrary, they will be drinking hard, stealing, hating, killing, and only occasionally thinking, what if God might not like this? Oh well, all this is not going to be soon. Just like I would not be interested to hear about methods of manufacturing golden jewelry or faceting diamonds, they are not interested to hear anything about God. Once I was talking to a former head of a parish. He was telling me that he was working on his dissertation. I said to him, but we are already in the age when it is time to think about using the time left to make as much as possible in the monastic pursuit, and not in acquiring earthly titles. Will God need your degree? He replied, well, God. It is not known if He exists or not, but the PhD degree is almost mine. Faith acquires a real value only when it is characterized by love for God, because only love can make us want to transform ourselves sincerely, willing to become what our beloved wants us to be, and later it may even grow into a passion, which will make us give up everything that stands in the way to the wide open embrace of the Creator. This is when one comes to a true monasticism, to being one-to-one with God. So, helping people strengthen their faith is the sole purpose of such techniques as making standard ritual bodily movements, repeating prayers, performing ritual dances, and worshipping images of God and saints on icons or in the form of idols. But with all the seeming absurdity of playing rites, initiations, common and individual mantras, games, etc., God adjusts to these games that people play and helps sincere seekers overcome the difficult first steps of the great path against this background. although the true baptism in the Holy Spirit, which was described by Philip the Apostle in particular, in no way resembles the corresponding rite of any church that is known under the same name. God accepts this act from sincere neophytes if they perform it as a vow to Him that they have an unwavering resolution to seek and to find Him as their goal. But when companies of murderers accept baptism before setting off for their bloody crimes, like it was, for example, during the Chechen War, does it not look like an abominable desecration of the teachings and the sacrificial death of Jesus Christ for us? The same can be said about christening of children. Does not common everyday experience tell us that it is a completely useless act? One may have seen both christened and non-christened children get sick, die, become drunkards, or criminals when they grow up. Christening is an oath of devotion to God, and not at all an act of guard magic, and only experienced and mature people can give such an oath, and they must do it themselves, but not godparents for them. And strings with crosses that people put on the children's necks sometimes turn out to be slip knots for little babies. Sometimes they get entangled in those strings that strangle their necks. Crosses worn around the necks were used by executioners during the compulsory christening of Russians to mark those who had already been christened, so that it would be easier for them to catch and subject to tortures or to kill those people who tried to evade this. But why do people wear crosses now? Do they really think that God needs them to? But it is enough for God if there is a sign of christening in a sincere Christian's soul. But on the other hand, prayers before meal, icons in one's house, attendance of churches, participation in rituals, repetition of mantras, and feeling a cross on the chest, all of this can strengthen the faith by reminding one about God, and God gives the worthy seekers confirmations of correctness of their initial efforts by affecting their emotional sphere. He grants them an experience of bliss by creating flows of grace. But there are no saving rituals nonetheless, and upon acquiring loving faith, one has to start studying the will of God, as opposed to canons of the organization in which one started the path. Also, one has to make real efforts on self-transformation, transformation of oneself as a soul, as a consciousness. As we can see, there is nothing wrong in getting involved in ritual forms of religious practice at a certain stage of one's development. This has been typical of all times, countries, and religion forms, and it does not make sense to try to figure out which ritual forms are better and which worse. The more peace, harmony, pure and tranquil joy, bliss and love they carry, the better. These are exactly the qualities that religious rites should help believers cultivate. The main issue is not the form of ritual practices, but the ideology that is preached by the organizations that provide these practices. All people differ by their psychogenetic age, i.e., by the age of the soul. The age of the body, the ontogenetic age, is a different thing. In the next incarnation, everyone can quite quickly and easily realize what they developed in the previous incarnations. This relates to the intellectual potential, level of development of the chakras, amount of the mass of the consciousness, inclinations in the professional field, intensity of certain psychic traits. This is why it is perfectly normal that there are adult people who possess dramatically different abilities to comprehend religious issues. It is also normal that a huge number of believers along with their leaders, remain on the preliminary stage of their spiritual advancement until the end of their current incarnations. In their next lives, they will have a chance to continue the path. But they do need to be informed that this stage is just a preliminary one. This will help those of them who can go, wake up, and move further. Initial methods: ethic, self-correction. People who are still at the preliminary stage of mastering their religiosity believe that the faith in the ideological concept and rituals of the organization of their choice is a sufficient condition for their salvation. These people are not yet capable of comprehending words of God, not even those of them that are written in the Holy Scriptures. Opinions and orders of their earthly pastors are much dearer and more valuable to them. For example, despite the fact that God told people not to kill, but to love and forgive, Christians became famous for so many terrifying atrocities throughout the history of Christianity on the earth. So many wars, murders, tortures, and other crimes they have committed. As for killing of animals, scarcely 0.001% of Christians obey the will of God in this respect. Where is the place for Christian love? There is no sight of you among Christians. This is because these Christians are not true ones. The initial stage of spiritual advancement implies making real efforts on self-transformation. God expects from us not prayers and kowtowing. He does not need them. He needs us to become better. And the first thing that the aspirant has to do is to accept the principle of love. Accept it not as a nice phase, acknowledging the beauty of it, but as a strict rule of conduct. And no practical methods, be they exercises of hatha yoga, work with the chakras and meridians, winter swimming, etc., will bring us closer to God. In fact, they can even lead us astray sometimes, if we do not follow the commandments of God regarding love. Let us look at the nutrition, for example. If we contaminate our bodies with coarse energies of dead bodies of animals, this will not allow us to attain the required degree of refinement of the consciousness for getting closer to the abode of the Creator. On the contrary, it will drag us towards hell and create for us bad karma, which will have to be redeemed in our next incarnations. But health and karma considerations are not a principal issue here. The main point is that God is love, and He allows us to get close to Him only if we become love. Impressions as food for the soul. But material substances are not the only food that we consume. As food, we, as souls, also use impressions. Russian religious psychologist George Gurdjieff was among those who talked about it in these terms in the beginning of the 20th century. And if we want to turn away from what is evil and cling to what is good, we need to take all opportunities to use food of this kind in nature, art, communicating with spiritual people, etc., and attuning to the subtle and harmonious phenomena. At the same time, we need to keep away from coarse impressions, which are primarily created by people of the tamas guna. Initial control of emotions. Avoiding outer coarseness is just one of the methods, but the main task for us is to eliminate inner coarseness, including that which comes out of us. This can be attained by controlling emotions, which are states of us as consciousnesses. Each emotion emanates beyond the body, affecting surrounding people and other living beings. And the more intensive it is, the further from the body it emanates. Solving the task of controlling the emotions radically will be possible only at the next higher stages of work. But if we do not set this goal right now and start to accustom ourselves to self-control, we can hardly expect ourselves to achieve any success in the future. For now, an effective method of struggling with bursts of coarse emotions and various manifestations of egotism is penitential work, which we have discussed in detail. About compassion. Let me note that a superficial and shallow attitude towards ethic issues can sometimes produce an opposite effect compared to what is expected. For example, we discussed acceptance of the compassion principle as one of the first steps towards love. But does everyone clearly realize that compassion does not have anything to do with plunging into unpleasant emotional states of worrying about someone? People who fall into states like that become unbearable for others, especially for those whom they worry about. The bioenergetic impact of the fields with such characteristics sometimes can be the final blow for those wounded or sick people who become the subject to such worrying. The victims may feel a desperate need to get rid of this compassionate monster who overwhelms them with such a state, to get rid by all means at the level of the deepest instinct or self-preservation which is beyond the control of the intellect. Such compassion, just like bioenergetic vampirism, ruins loving relationships between people, destroys families. No, compassion does not mean heavy emotions, but overall pure and careful attitude towards all manifestations of life, avoiding causing any unnecessary harm to anyone, as well as willingness to help everyone in everything good. Self-discipline and energy. The initial stage of spiritual work is not sattva yet. It is rajas, and among the most important factors that determine success at this stage are energy and self-discipline, cultivating the ability to make efforts and super efforts on the spiritual path. One can develop these qualities well by engaging in various dynamic sport activities, of which especially great are those that connect us with living nature, hiking, mountain climbing, etc. Practicing Oriental martial arts would also be very good for that purpose. But it is important to emphasize that this practice should in no way lead to growth of aggressiveness, brutality, and rudeness. Another important thing to understand is that the techniques of martial arts per se cannot conduct the seeker to spiritual heights. This can be achieved only by working with the chakras and through mastering the art of meditation, which are integral parts of the training in the best schools of this orientation. In any specific kind of classes at this stage, be it karate, hiking, or something else, both instructors and students must pay their principal attention to increasing the level of their morality which is based on causing no unnecessary harm to any living beings. It would be appropriate for everyone to start thinking about and to make right decisions regarding their service according to Karma Yoga principles and change professional occupation, if necessary, or start studying in order to acquire a new profession.